Well, hello there, sports fans. Welcome back to the channel. What in the world is Wayne doing today? Well, today we're going to talk about whether or not my next motorcycle will be another Triumph. And as you could tell from the title, nope, not buying another Triumph. Why? Well, we'll get to that in just a minute. So to start with, when I decided that I was going to get into adventure motorcycle riding, I sat on a lot of different motorcycles. I sat on BMWs and KTMs and Suzuki V-Stroms and Yamaha Teneris, and none of them really fit me very well. And then I was in New York City, down in Manhattan, and I saw a Triumph dealer. So I walked in and I sat on a Tiger 800, and it fit me like a glove. I fell in love with that first time that I sat on a Tiger. So I came back home and I was riding a Honda Interstate at the time, and my local dealer in Elmhurst, Illinois had a Triumph Tiger 800 XC on the showroom floor. It was a 2012, it was used, and this was 2015. And so I traded my bike in and I bought that. It was a wonderful motorcycle. I rode it all over the eastern seaboard and throughout the Midwest. I did the Tail of the Dragon with it. I did the Blue Ridge Parkway. I did the Natchez Trace Trail, I think that's it. So I rode it all over, and what a fantastic motorcycle it was. Just, I loved it. And I probably still have that motorcycle today if I hadn't walked into my dealer and the sales manager came up to me and says, "Hey, I want to show you something." And he walks me over to this Tiger Explorer 1200 XC, beautiful motorcycle. It was a 2015, and this was 2017 when this happened. It was 2015 with 4 miles on it. Original price was over $17,000. I got it for $11,000. I couldn't pass it up. And that motorcycle took me everywhere. I went down to Mexico for a month after I retired. Lived with a Mexican family down there. I rode it all over the US. Utah, California, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, everywhere. I've ridden it all over Canada. I rode it up to the Arctic Circle on the Dempster Highway. Magnificent machine, shaft drive. I only had one problem with it. Down in Mexico, the alternator went out, had to get fixed. No problem, we got it fixed. But the problem with that motorcycle is it was too heavy. Weighed 570 pounds. And I'm going to put a chart up here in a minute that shows you the three motorcycles, three Triumphs that I've owned and the differences between the three. So I rode that bike everywhere, but it was getting too big for me, 570 pounds. I take it off-road, and if I fall over with it, it was really challenging for me to get it up, and sometimes I couldn't. I needed help. So when they came out with the new 2020 Tiger Rally Pro, beautiful styling, beautiful design. They had changed the firing order so it had more low-end torque than the 800. They had shaved the weight way down. So going from a 570-pound motorcycle down to a 443-pound motorcycle was a huge difference, and I could pick that one up easily. So before we get into why I'm not going to buy any more Triumphs, let me just pull this chart up and show you the differences between these three motorcycles. So as you can see from this chart, let's start with the 2012 800 XC. It had 94 horsepower, the torque was 58 pounds, and the weight was 474 pounds wet, so probably slightly lower than that dry. Moving over to the 2015 Explorer, 135 horsepower, lots of oomph on that one, 89 foot-pounds of torque, and it weighed 570 pounds. It was just a beast. And then lastly, the 2020 Tiger Rally Pro, and it was these specs that really attracted me to this bike. 94 horsepower, so the same as the 800 XC, but higher torque, 64 foot-pounds, and then the weight, 443 pounds dry. So that's what sold me on that motorcycle. Light, quick, great firing order, and so I pulled the trigger on that bike. So we're going to focus the rest of this video on the Tiger Rally Pro and why I will never buy another Triumph. But let me tell you the good things I liked about that motorcycle. I loved the low-end torque. It really performed well in the dirt and gravel, and I do a lot of that kind of riding. Way better than either of the other two Tigers that I have owned. It had shift assist, which I absolutely love. It had heated grips, heated seats, cruise control. It had all the bells and whistles. And the styling was impeccable. Just one of the prettiest bikes I have ever ridden. It also was really impressive off-road, and it was really impressive on-road. So it kind of was a jack of all trades, looked good, rode good, all of those things. What didn't I like about the Tiger Rally Pro? Well, before we get into what I really didn't like about the Tiger Rally Pro, here's a few things that were bothersome but weren't deal killers for me. So the first is their electronics and their TFT display. I could never get my GoPro to hook up correctly. I could never get the GPS to work. It just, you know, I take it into the dealer and they go, oh, it works fine, but it wouldn't connect to my phone and it wouldn't connect to my GoPro. So the electronics sucked. Another part of the electronics that sucked were you could not change modes, riding modes on the fly. You can do that with BMWs. I rode with a guy all through South America on a GS. So if I had to switch into dirt mode, I had to stop the motorcycle, switch into dirt mode, and then ride. And when I wanted to go back to pavement mode, I had to stop the motorcycle, switch into pavement mode, and go from there. So it was very cumbersome, a hassle to use. But that's not why I'll never own a Triumph again. The reason I won't own another Triumph is what happened to that Tiger Rally Pro in the 4 years that I owned it. Well, as many of you know if you've watched my videos, I made a trip to the southern tip of South America a couple of years ago. I left in August 2022 and I came back in April of 2023. Made it all the way to Ushuaia, then back up to Buenos Aires, flew home to San Francisco, and then rode home from there. So what happened on that trip? Well, the first thing that happened is I started getting water in the gas tank. Now, I rode through some torrential downpours in Nicaragua and Costa Rica, but as I crossed the border into Nicaragua and I got into Costa Rica, the bike started to stall and I couldn't keep it running. I found a gas station. I was able to nurse it to a gas station, and the attendant looked at it and says, you've got water in your tank. And I'm like, oh. So we put a stabilizer in. That didn't help. And then some really nice gentleman came along. He wasn't a motorcycle mechanic, but he was pretty adept at looking at things and coming up with solutions. So he and I removed the gas tank on the side of the road. It was about 100 degrees Fahrenheit out, just sweating bullets. We emptied all the fuel out, we put fresh fuel in it, and I took it for a spin again. Still wasn't running right. So we took the tank off a second time, and this time there was a filter inside the tank, and we took that apart, cleaned that, refilled it with fuel, and it finally started to run okay. There was still something not quite right. It was making a sound. I would later learn that there was a hose, a vacuum hose that we should have connected that didn't get connected. Anyway, figured, okay, problem solved. Then I go through another torrential downpour. I get into Panama City. I'm just arriving in Panama City, and the bike starts to chug again. It won't go. So I nurse it to my hotel. I happen to run into another rider along the way who had a friend who runs a Triumph dealer in Panama City. So we exchanged information, and then he got back to me that afternoon and he said, tomorrow, Saturday morning, they're going to be waiting for you at 9 o'clock. Fantastic. So I take it into this Triumph dealer, and what they discovered is that the seals around the gas cap had deteriorated. And in fact, there was one seal that they think, they showed me other gas caps on other Triumphs in their showroom. There was one seal around the gas cap, gasket, seal, whatever you want to call it, wasn't even there. So I don't know if this was a factory default or what happened. Everybody was telling me, you got bad gas somewhere. No, what was happening is these torrential downpours were dumping water into the gas tank through the gas cap. So this dealer in Panama City rebuilt the entire gas cap, took parts from other gas caps and other motorcycles, and I never had a problem since. So the problem with water in my fuel was not a bad fuel situation, it was poor design by Triumph. So we go along a little further. We get into Ecuador, and we just crossed into Ecuador, and all of a sudden my TFT screen lit up. No ABS, no traction control, nothing, right? But I was able to ride the bike, and I still had traction control and ABS. So I guessed that there must be a sensor somewhere that had gone bad. Sure enough, we get to Quito, there's a Triumph dealer there, I take it into them, and there's a cable that goes from the handlebars on the bike all the way down to the rear wheel. And Triumph uses these little plastic clips to attach cables on their motorcycle. And those plastic clips came off, and the cable went over and started rubbing the tire and caused a short. So that was an expensive fix, but we got it fixed. And then that dealer in Quito, they zip tied the hell out of that line so it wouldn't cause a problem anymore. The rest of my South America trip was okay till I got to San Francisco. Flew the bike back to San Francisco, and between Portland and Seattle, the bike started to die again. Had to get it towed up to a Triumph dealer in Tacoma, Washington, or Fife, Washington, actually. And they discovered that the battery, which I'd put in before I left on my trip, the dealer in Victoria, British Columbia put it in, went bad on me, and it was causing this cycling issue, and it just wasn't getting power to the engine. So we got that replaced. All right, so I figured we got the kinks worked out and everything will be okay. Then, this past summer, I made a ride up to the Arctic Ocean, up to Prudhoe Bay in Alaska. Dead Horse is the name of the town. Went with 3 friends from South America that I'd met. So we made it Fairbanks, no problem. From there, we had a 2-day ride up to Dead Horse. There's a camp called Coldfoot Camp, which is kind of halfway between Fairbanks and Dead Horse, and our plan was to make it to that halfway point that day. Unfortunately, we didn't make it. The day that we chose to ride was miserable. Rain, mud, construction, sliding all over the place. By the time we got to Yukon River Camp, we were all shivering, cold, wet, and we all decided, nah, we're not going any further. Let's get a room here for the night. Next morning we wake up, the sun is shining, the roads have dried out. We kind of go from there. So, anyway, here's the group. We're getting ready to start off. This is the haul road, and the trucks come by here really, really hard and fast. So we have to really be careful. Dried out. So we have a nice little ride. We go up to the Arctic Circle sign, and we end up at Coldfoot Camp that night. So it took us 2 days to get to Coldfoot Camp instead of 1 day. Had good food, good night there. Expensive as heck. It's $249 for a room that you share with somebody. Anyway. Well, in our little tiny room, we have Steve and his undies.
I'm in my undies. What are you doing?
And my bed is 2 rooms, and you're on TV, Grandpa.
Grandpa.
Anyway, spent the night in Coldfoot Camp. The next day, we headed for Dead Horse and the Arctic Ocean. Again, another beautiful day. We went through Antican Pass, through the Alaska range of mountains. Gorgeous ride, really wonderful. We get to Dead Horse, check into our hotel. The restaurant there is unbelievable. Speaking of which, I'll also put a link to that video below if you haven't already seen that. So we spend the night in Dead Horse. The next morning we wake up and it is miserable out again. All right, folks, so what do we have here? Yesterday we rode from Coldfoot Camp all the way to Dead Horse, Alaska, here on the Arctic Ocean. And this morning it's 3.5 degrees Celsius right now, very cold. Supposed to be some rain in the forecast. So everybody's fueling up right now for the ride. Anyway, we're getting ready for a cold and possibly wet ride today. We'll see how it goes. One of my cameras only has 17% life. It had 80% yesterday, but as you know, cameras don't do well in the cold. So, anyway. And then we head out. It was a miserable ride, and they were doing construction where they dump a whole bunch of mud and calcium chloride. We went through a section where there must have been 10, 12 inches of mud. One of our riders went down 3 times in that particular section. But eventually we made it back to Coldfoot Camp and everything was good. We washed our bikes down. That would have been the second time that we'd washed our bikes on that trip. Next morning, we head back to Fairbanks. We get about 5 miles south of Coldfoot Camp and my bike dies. Completely, nothing. We pulled the battery, we checked all the fuses, did everything that I know how to do, and we couldn't get it started. So I ended up with a very expensive tow to get from the Arctic Circle down to Fairbanks. Cost me $5,500. Then from there, none of the dealers in Fairbanks would take a look at the bike, so I had to rent a U-Haul and take it down to Anchorage. When I got to Anchorage, took it into the Triumph dealer there, what they discovered is that underneath the battery, in the battery compartment, there's a little drain hole. That little drain hole had gotten clogged with calcium chloride mud. And then we rode through rain for a couple of days. That compartment filled with 2 to 3 inches of this salty calcium chloride water. Now here's the design flaw from Triumph. First off, the main wiring harness for the bike sits underneath the battery. Sat in all of that salt water. The main relay for the motorcycle sits there. That salt water corroded and fried the motorcycle. The dealer basically said the labor is going to be more than this motorcycle's worth. And you know, you want us to fix it, we will, and we don't know that we can fix it. They quoted me $5,000 to $6,000 to replace the wiring harness, but they would not guarantee that that would fix the problem. So I flew home. The dealer bought me an airplane ticket. I flew home. I left the motorcycle there. And eventually I sold it to another rider in Anchorage who wanted a project for him and his daughter to work on during the cold Alaska winters. So I'm now in the market for a new motorcycle. Oh, by the way, before I move on to that, the video I posted, again, as I mentioned earlier, I'll post a link down below. The video that I posted on this experience was by far my most watched video. I got over 24,000 views and still counting on that video. I guess people like a disaster because it was called Disaster on the Dalton. Anyway, lots of comments there, lots of supportive comments, lots of negative comments, but I had 2 comments about the Triumph motorcycles. One was a guy who took a tour up to Alaska this past summer just before we got up there, and there was a Triumph just like mine that had the exact same problem and didn't finish the trip. That's number one. Number two, a guy in the UK contacts me and he said, yeah, I bought an 800, Tiger 800 XCA from the Triumph Experience. Now the Triumph Experience in Wales is a place where riders can come in and Triumph will run you through the paces. They'll take you into mud and dirt and sand and gravel and show you what these bikes are capable of. But they get really, really dirty. And they are capable. They're very, very capable. So this guy buys this 800 XCA and he's cleaning it up and he decides to pull the battery out because it's all kind of dirty in there. And he sees that Triumph has drilled an additional 6 holes in that battery compartment. So Triumph is aware that this is a problem and it's an issue, but they haven't fixed it. I bought a first generation Tiger Rally Pro when they came out in 2020. Big mistake on my part. I won't ever do it again. So the answer to the question at the beginning is, will I ever buy a Triumph again? And the answer right now is no, I'm not going to. That bike caused me way too many problems, way too many design flaws. I'm looking at a number of different motorcycles right now, heading into Vancouver next week to ride a few, and then in a couple weeks I'll head down to Seattle and see what I can find down there. Anyway, that's it. No more Triumphs for this guy. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you on the next ride. Ciao.